New Orleans, 1918. A city alive with music, mystery, and now terror. Fear gripped New Orleans as an elusive figure known as the Axeman, under the cover of night, was invading homes to harm Italian grocers and their families, spreading alarm throughout the community. No one felt safe. 3 decades after Jack the Ripper, the Axeman, much like Jack the Ripper, mocked the media with his brutal murders, earning the nickname America's own Bayou Jack the Ripper. The press observed heightened fear within the Italian immigrant community, where anxious men remained vigilant through the night to protect their families. New Orleans Superintendent of Police Frank Mooney believed the perpetrator to be a, and I quote, murderous degenerate who takes pleasure in bloodshed. End of quote. The police, overwhelmed and outmatched, offered little comfort. New Orleans was a city under siege, held hostage by an unseen terror. The French Quarter, with its wrought iron balconies and gaslit streets, was the heart of New Orleans. It was also the Axeman's hunting ground. His reign of terror began in May 1918. The attacks followed a chilling pattern. The perpetrator entered the property by chiseling out a lower wooden panel of the back door. Following the murder, the victim's axe was left behind on the premises. No valuable items were taken, ruling out burglary as a motive. He often attacked as they slept, the first sign of his presence the chilling thud of his axe. The brutality of the attacks shocked even the most hardened police officers. The Axeman didn't just kill, he butchered. His victims were left mutilated, their bodies testament to his savagery. Fear gripped the city like a vice. The Maggios. The first suspected Axeman attack, May 23, 1918, location 4901 Magnolia Street. The killer broke into Joseph and Catherine Maggio's home. He found his first victims asleep in their beds. The scene that greeted the police the next morning was nothing short of horrific. Joseph's head was cracked with his own axe and his throat slashed with a razor. Catherine's throat was slit with a razor. She was almost decapitated, and she choked on her blood as she bled out. The brutality of the attack sent shockwaves through New Orleans. Several arrests were made, including one involving the Maggio brothers, but all were released due to insufficient evidence. The sole clue was a mysterious message written in chalk on the pavement near the crime scene. The message ominously stated, "Mrs. Maggio will sit up tonight just like Mrs. Tony." The police speculated that this message alluded to Mrs. Tony Sciambra, who was among several Italian descendant grocers killed or assaulted between 1911 and 1912. Most of these victims had been targeted by a man wielding an axe, entering their homes at night by removing a panel from the back door. If these earlier incidents were indeed linked, it suggested that the Axeman had been using this method of operation for an extended period. Louis Besumer and Anna Lowe attacked on June 28, 1918, location D'Orgenois and La Harpe Streets. On June 27, 1918, Harriet Lowe and her lover Louis Besumer were attacked in the back of his grocery store. Besumer struck across the right temple with a small hatchet. When officers arrived at the horrific scene, Lowe was found unconscious with a deep cut over her left ear. The victims survived, but were unable to help identify the Axeman. The hatchet was found in the bathroom. At the time, law enforcement promptly detained a 41-year-old African-American man who had been employed at the grocery store for just a week before the attacks, citing conflicting accounts of his whereabouts. However, due to a lack of sufficient evidence, the man was subsequently released. The Besumer and Lowe case gained attention due to revelations made by Lowe before her passing. She informed police that Besumer, her lover, was a German spy, citing foreign handwritten letters found in his possession. This accusation led to Besumer's brief detention for 2 days. However, in August, as Lowe lay dying, she identified Besumer as her assailant, resulting in his subsequent arrest. Louis Besumer spent 9 months incarcerated for her murder, but was acquitted in May 1919 due to the unreliable nature of the case. The only witness, Lowe, had sustained severe head injuries and was heavily sedated. Investigators found it implausible that Besumer could have inflicted these injuries himself, as he had also suffered a fractured skull. While Besumer was in prison, Additional victims fell prey to savage attacks. The Axeman was still out there, lurking in the shadows, and New Orleans was his playground. Anna Schneider was the next victim on August 5, 1918, when she was brutally assaulted. 8 months pregnant at the time, Anna woke to find a shadowy figure standing over her and was struck in the face. Her husband, Ed Schneider, arrived home late from work after midnight and found Anna with her face covered in blood. Fortunately, the attack did not impact her pregnancy. She stayed in the hospital and a week later delivered a healthy daughter. When the newspapers published the story, they instilled fear in the public with bold headlines asking, "Is there an Axeman at large in New Orleans?" Axes and chisels were discovered outside several homes, and a few residents reported scaring off a possible intruder. The assault on Schneider marked a deviation in the Axeman's modus operandi. She was neither Italian nor a grocer, suggesting that anyone in the city could now be at risk. Authorities found no signs of forced entry through the windows or doors. They apprehended James Gleason, a former convict who fled from the authorities. However, lacking any evidence linking him to the crime, he was released, explaining that he ran due to his frequent encounters with law enforcement. At this point, police were utterly perplexed by each case. With no leads to follow, they publicly speculated that these attacks were the work of the same individual. As yet another Axeman suspect was released by the police, fear began to spread throughout New Orleans. On August 10, 1918, location is believed to be Tonti and Gravia Street. Joseph Romano, an 80-year-old Italian barber. 5 days after the Schneider attack, Pauline and Mary Bruno were awakened by a disturbance from the adjacent room where their uncle Joseph Romano slept. Upon entering, they found Joseph with a severe head injury and bleeding profusely. The assailant fled the scene. The women described him as dark-skinned, heavy-set, dressed in a dark suit and wearing a slouch hat. Similar to previous attacks, the intruder had chiseled a panel out of the back door to gain entry, and once again no valuables were taken. A bloody axe was found in his backyard. 2 days later, Joseph succumbed to his injuries. After the Romano murder, New Orleans plunged into a heightened state of alarm fueled by media frenzy. Newspapers began reporting on armed men keeping watch over their families while they slept. Terrified residents now lived with the constant fear of an Axeman attack, worsened by the police's inability to uncover the identity of the killer. In 1886, writer Robert Louis Stevenson published The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Jekyll and Hyde represent the dual identities of the main character, an upright citizen who transforms into a madman with the help of an elixir. Over a century later, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde continues to be referenced when describing individuals who exhibit two conflicting personalities, one virtuous and the other malevolent. This concept was familiar to investigators in New Orleans. Amplifying the atmosphere of fear and uncertainty, retired detective John D'Antonio shared his theories with the Times-Picayune. D'Antonio suggested that the killer exhibited dual personalities, one appearing as a regular citizen, while the other emerged as an individual consumed by an uncontrollable desire for murder, driven by a motiveless impulse. To those who entertained this perspective, it implied that the killer was virtually invisible, blending in seamlessly with his potential victims in daily life without anyone suspecting him. There was an eerie, almost supernatural quality to his ability to enter and exit places unnoticed, and witnesses struggled to recall any distinct details about him. One couldn't simply arrest a dark, looming figure based on these elusive characteristics. The city, by now numb with terror, braced itself for the next attack. Months passed without any reports of the Axeman. Speculations arose whether he had departed the area or completed his deadly intentions. With the end of World War I, people shifted their focus to other worries, believing they had seen the last of their local menace. Soon, however, they would discover their assumptions about the killer were mistaken. On the night of March 10, 1919, the Axeman struck again, spreading fear to the New Orleans suburb of Gretna. Rosie Cortimiglia woke up to witness her husband Charles battling the Axeman, He would ultimately lose the fight, enduring repeated blows to the head and sustaining a fractured skull. Rosie, who was holding her 2-year-old daughter, would then become the focus of the Axeman's attention. They were both struck by the axe, resulting in immediate death for the child and a fractured skull for Rosie. Upon hearing the screams from the Cortemilia's household, fellow grocer Orlando Giordano hurried to his neighbor's residence and promptly notified the authorities. Once again, no valuables were taken. The back door of the house was discovered with a missing panel, and a bloodied axe was found on the back porch of the property. Both Charles and Rosie eventually recovered fully, but Rosie accused their neighbor and fellow grocer Giordano of the attack. Being competitors in business, Rosie implicated Giordano and his son Frank. Both men were charged and convicted of murder. Frank was sentenced to hang, while Giordano received a life sentence in prison. Charles vehemently denied his wife's accusations. In 1920, Rose retracted her statement and admitted she had falsely accused the men because of the strife and competition between their rival grocery stores. Fortunately, Frank and Orlando's charges were dropped. The police once again were left with more questions than answers. On March 14, 1919, a letter allegedly penned by the killer, addressed to esteemed mortal and signed The Axeman, arrived at the offices of the New Orleans Times-Picayune. He wrote, and I quote, "They have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman. When I see fit, I shall come and claim other victims. I alone know whom they shall be. I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe, besmeared with blood and brains of he whom I have sent below to keep me company." End of the quote. He would spare the city on one condition. On the following Tuesday night, every house in New Orleans must be filled with the sound of jazz music. And I quote, "Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time on next Tuesday night, I'm going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I'm going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I'm very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well, then so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it on Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe." End of quote. The city, desperate for any reprieve from the terror, embraced the Axeman's bizarre request. On the appointed night, jazz music spilled from every window and every doorway. At 12:15 on March 19, New Orleans resounded with vibrant jazz music. Residents without record players flocked to packed clubs and lounges, while others hosted lively jazz block parties. Composer Joseph Davila created a song for the occasion titled The Mysterious Axeman's Jazz, which swiftly became a sensational hit. The sheet music circulated widely, featuring a cover illustration of a family anxiously playing a piano while keeping watch for an intruder. The night of the Axeman's ultimatum passed without incident. As the city of New Orleans struggled to maintain its fragile sense of security, another horrifying chapter unfolded. On August 10, 1919, Steve Boker became the Axeman's next known target. The attack occurred in the dead of night, shrouded in the same eerie silence that had accompanied the previous assaults. Boker stumbled out of his home, drenched in blood and barely conscious. He had been struck in the head with an axe, just like the victims before him. Boker managed to stagger to a neighbor's house, another grocer by the name of Frank Genusa, where he collapsed, leaving a trail of blood behind him. He was rushed to the hospital where he miraculously survived his injuries. But like many others, he could not recall the details of the attack. The police investigation revealed that the assailant had entered through a panel in the back door, which had been chiseled away. Once more, there was no sign of anything being taken. The method was chillingly consistent with the Axeman's previous attacks, leaving little doubt that the same sinister figure was responsible. Boker's attack sent another wave of fear rippling through the city. The residents of New Orleans were once again reminded that the Axeman could strike at any moment, and no one was safe from his wrath. Despite the terror, life in New Orleans continued, albeit under a constant cloud of dread. The city was trapped in a nightmarish game of cat and mouse with the Axeman always one step ahead. Tragically, in September 1919, concerned neighbors forcibly entered the apartment of 19-year-old Sarah Lawman. They discovered her unconscious on her bed, bloodied with a severe head injury and missing several teeth. The assailant had entered through an open window and attacked her with an axe. The axe was later found discarded on the front lawn. Lawman survived the assault, but like other victims, she couldn't recall anything that occurred before the attack. Because the attacker entered Lawman's apartment through the window rather than the back door, some speculated that this might not be the work of the Axeman, but possibly a copycat. Then in October, Mike Pepitone, a grocer, became the final victim of the Axeman. Mike's wife woke to the sounds of a struggle coming from another room. His wife entered the room to find Mike Pepitone lying in a pool of blood. Pepitone was assaulted with an iron bar, an improvised weapon possibly used when the killers discovered he did not possess an axe. He succumbed shortly to the head injuries he sustained. Mrs. Pepitone reported seeing two men fleeing the scene. The attack on the Pepitone family marked the end of the Axeman's known attacks, but the fear he instilled lingered long after. The state's newspaper speculated about the identity of the killer, pondering whether he was a friend, a madman, a robber, a sadist, or even something supernatural. This question echoed in the minds of others as well. Observers noted that the door panels removed from each crime scene were too small for a grown man to pass through. Furthermore, the doors were always locked, ruling out the possibility of the assailant reaching in to unlock them. How did he enter and exit the crime scenes? Superstitions were prevalent in New Orleans. Local folklore included tales of various mythical beings and events. One such legend was that of the Needlemen, who allegedly stabbed women into unconsciousness before abducting them. Another belief centered on the Black Bottle Men, who were rumored to murder hospital patients and then sell the bodies to medical students. It was unsurprising when many residents of New Orleans started referring to the Axeman as a devil in their midst, particularly after a witness claimed to have seen him dressed in black with a black slouch hat. He was described as tall and thin, resembling the typical image of a phantom. In the aftermath of the gruesome events, several suspects emerged. The Black Hand. As the Axeman mainly focused on Italian-American grocers, there is speculation that they were targeted by an early mafia group known as the Black Hand. This organization derived its name from sending threatening notes marked with a black hand to those who refused its demands, indicating severe repercussions. This extortion method, prevalent in Italian communities of the time, led to theories that the murders could be linked to unpaid debts. However, the Axeman often spared his victims, which contrasted with the usual Black Hand approach of using violence as a direct punishment for non-payment. Vendetta. Many Sicilian immigrants in America during that period harbored a profound distrust of authorities, often resolving disputes through traditional methods known as the vendetta. This vendetta could have been a motivating factor behind several of the attacks. However, many discounted the mafia hypothesis, pointing to the strict codes of organized crime in the area that explicitly forbade harming women and children. Joseph Mumfre, December 1920 in Los Angeles, California. Mrs. Mike Pepitone, dressed in black, waited for Joseph Mumfre, a resident of New Orleans. When Mr. Mumfre emerged from a shadowy doorway, Mrs. Pepitone shot him. He died on the sidewalk as she stayed put, awaiting the police's arrival to arrest him. She maintained that she had witnessed Mr. Mumfre fleeing from her husband's room on the day he was killed. However, apart from Mrs. Pepitone's testimony, there was no evidence directly linking Mumfre to any of the crimes. Mrs. Pepitone served 3 years of a 10-year sentence and then disappeared. Mumfre had been incarcerated from 1918 to 1919. The attacks ceased while Mumfre was imprisoned, but resumed once he was released. Following the murder of Mike Pepitone, Mumfre departed New Orleans, which may explain the apparent cessation of Axeman activity after 1919. Copycats. Despite the Axeman having a distinctive modus operandi, not all the killings adhered strictly to it. This discrepancy led some to speculate that the Axeman might have been multiple individuals, possibly acting independently or together to instill fear in the community. A demon. His knack for appearing in people's homes in the dead of night and disappearing just as effortlessly led some to believe the Axeman was exactly what he proclaimed in his letter to the press, the most terrible spirit that ever existed, whether in reality or the realm of imagination. Who was the Axeman of New Orleans? Was he a lone madman, a sadist who reveled in the city's terror? The questions lingered unanswered, echoing through the years. The mystery of the Axeman of New Orleans remains one of the city's darkest enigmas, a chilling reminder of the terror that once stalked its streets. The Axeman took his secrets to the grave, leaving behind a legacy of fear and a mystery that continues to captivate and terrify to this day. Please support this channel. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you very much.